You are but one among the teeming masses of humanity, raised from obscurity at the whim of an inquisitor. Perhaps you drew their attention through exceptional service, great devotion to the cause, or some special talent. Whatever the case, you have no choice. Your master spoke, and you are bound to their service. You are an Acolyte.
Hey, my name's Rob. I go by Fodzilla on Discord.
And I'm Trey. My Discord name is just 4 capital I's. Today we'll be discussing Acolyte, a solo or cooperative narrative hack of Games Workshop's Kill Team. Is there a moment when you were engaging with Kill Team that you thought this would be a great system for narrative or cooperative play?
I was digging around for something to play, and I played a bit of Rangers of Shadow Deep with my brothers, and then I found these new Kill Team rules, and I was like, yeah, they feel really good. They've got an interesting, how would I describe it? They give you feedback as you play. In a way some games don't. It always feels like something's happening, and there's a few really interesting little mechanics in there. They have an interesting line of sight and cover system where you can hide behind things and become untargetable. They have an interesting reciprocal melee system that makes melee kind of interesting decision making, and the whole thing is geared around multiple wounds and multiple damage in combat. And playing it felt a lot like a tabletop version of a game like XCOM or maybe like Fallout Tactics, a bit older, that kind of thing, where you've got a little squad of dudes going on missions or adventures or whatever, and you've got to kind of manipulate the environment. And I was looking at this and thinking, there's these really simple core mechanics, but they have the building blocks of an interesting character-driven game rather than the kind of adversarial competitive system that it's geared around. Yeah, and that was it. It was just this little nagging light bulb in there that went, yeah, this would be cool. This would work.
What brought you into the world of narrative and cooperative miniature gaming?
Here in Melbourne, in Australia, we had 2 years of fairly non-stop COVID lockdowns, and so just for the social sanity of it, I was playing like once a week. I'd have a co-op game night with my brothers, and we'd jump on and play something co-op, play Battletech or Mechanicus or something. And when we came out of COVID, I was like, well, I want to keep spending time with my brothers, and they're tabletop lifers. And they're like, well, if you want to see us, you've got to come play with us. And so I was digging around for a co-op game to play, and Rangers was recommended, and it looked fun. And we gave it a whirl, played a few games of it. And there's a couple of things about it that really struck me. One that I really liked, which was, well, a couple that I really liked. There's a really simple AI built into it, so the monsters will just, do something every turn. Rangers is like for anyone who hasn't played it, it's like Game of Thrones. You've gone north beyond the wall, and there's monsters out there who are going to get you, and you're the Rangers trying to save the world. And you go on missions and scenarios and adventures, and there's a dumb AI that does the enemies, and that's really simple and straightforward, and you know exactly what they're going to do. They do it anyway, and you've got to work around it. But coupled with that, it uses a deck of playing cards to shape scenarios, so you never quite know what's coming next. Every scenario, every time you play, it's going to be a little bit different, and I thought that was a really interesting combination, that it was very simple and yet a bit unpredictable and dynamic. Cool. And then on the other hand, it's a massively swingy D20-based system where you've got no idea what's going to happen. You can't rely on anything. You charge in to kill a goblin and you get murdered, and that's it. You're done.
Yeah.
And that struck me too.
I got into Stargrave for a bit. I really enjoyed the swinginess. It made for exciting moments at the table. But some players were like, we gotta go to 2d10s. We have to add a curve to this.
It's the same game system, so you'd know exactly how it feels.
Okay.
And you hear Joe talk about it, Joe McCulloch, and he leans into that. He's like, the wackiness is what makes games memorable. And I sympathize with that, but there's a personal taste thing. How often do you want something memorable to happen for it to be truly memorable? If wacky stuff happens every other turn, then the whole thing is wacky, but you don't have those really standout, hilarious or memorable or terrifying moments. So I'm more of a roll a few dice rather than one big dice guy.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Can you describe Acolyte?
Yeah, so I slapped a tagline on it that really tells you what it is. I called it a kill team adventure game. I took the kill team rule set and I stole a bunch of ideas and came up with some of my own. And I wrote a solo and/or co-op adventure game on the 2021 kill team engine. It started off really simple, just a basic dumb AI, which Kill Team is great for because it's a strategically complex but action simple game. There's only, 5 or 6 different things you can do each turn. And so it was really easy to tell enemies what to do in what order. So there's that part of it. There's scenarios, and it's kind of grew way out of control from there. It started off as 3 pages. Now it's 100 pages. So there's a party building adventure game, scenarios, randomly shaped. And you play a bunch of poor plebs roped into dirty jobs by an inquisitor, trying to stay alive while nasty gribblies try to eat you.
Kill Team, in its native state, is not a cooperative or narrative game. It attempts, maybe unsuccessfully, to be a tighter, almost competitive system. How do you close the gap between the out-of-the-box Kill Team and Acolyte?
In terms of simple, I'd really contrast it with Necromunda as a similar skirmish niche, but Necromunda is wildly complex. It's 1,200 pages of rules. There's 30 different actions to choose from. Kill Team is dead simple. In terms of translating it, it's really my own stupid fault. I was sitting there on Reddit and people would ask, is there a solo mode for this? Because I've got no one to play with. I want to just push some models around of an evening. I'd sit there and go, it'd be easy. Anyone could do it. Here are some ideas. And eventually, nothing came up. I'm like, finally, I should put my money where my mouth is, put my time in and actually sketch out something. So I started just messing around with this AI and I'm like, no, I can make this work. And I had those seeds in my mind of, it's an interesting system for a character-driven game. And once I had the AI, if anyone's played Rangers of Shadowdeep and Acolyte, you'll know that the opening scenarios are very, very similar. So as a proof of concept, I just took this Rangers scenario where you have to go investigate a deserted settlement and see what's going on, and then a bunch of zombies jump you. And I wrote that and I played it, and I was like, hey, this is actually pretty fun. It works. The tightness of the combat system, the lightness of it, if you will, I found to be a benefit because it lets you run the other side of a solo game in a really straightforward way, and it lets you focus on other parts of narrative than complex, crunchy mechanics.
Did you run into any barriers, or was it as easy as you predicted?
I wrote it first for a zombie, right? And a zombie, it sees you, it walks towards you, it eats you. It's dead easy because it's dead. But then I was like, well, what else can we add in, and what happens there? And starting to get a breadth of different monster types or enemy types, you have to start thinking about, well, how do things behave in different ways? When should they run at you? When should they avoid you? When should they stand off and shoot at you? And trying the tricky part, the hardest part, I think, was kind of build in rules to categorize these enemies on the fly rather than I didn't want to have to design everything or categorize everything specifically, like pick every monster and say what it will do, because I've seen games done like that, and it's a lot of work in a design sense to write that, but it's also a lot of work in a player sense to have to treat everything differently.
Yeah.
And so it took a whole lot of play testing to narrow it down to, I've got 3 types. I've got offensive melee guys, offensive ranged guys, and defensive ranged guys who all behave slightly differently, but there's enough nuance there to kind of capture the different kinds of the types, or the archetypes, I suppose, of enemies.
Yeah.
And then the other difficult part was, again, in terms of, I guess, trying to make most efficient use of a design. I didn't want to. One of the other things that appeals about Kill Team is there's a whole bank of. There's a whole 40K universe that you're situating a game in, and they've already got all the stuff, all the weapons, all the characters, all the skills that you can draw on. And so translating that takes a bit of work to say what will work in this game, what won't. But given that wealth of material, I didn't want to have a rule set that only worked on the 3 scenarios I'd written.
Mm-hmm.
Or it only worked on the 10 enemies I'd written. So I've got a rule set here. Can I make it so you can just drag in all this pre-existing stuff and just roll on a random table and take one of these existing Kill Team scenarios and just play your scrappy band of desperados against whatever random enemies you have. Yeah. And so I had to try and, I say teach. I had to try and teach the enemies to play more complex missions where they're not just obstacles that you can situate neatly in a story that you're writing. It's like, can you get them to semi-intelligently play objectives, things they have to pick up and run away with? And I don't know if I'm completely there.
Yeah.
But getting that balance right of, I guess, contextual behavior without having overwhelming complexity in decision trees was really difficult.
What was your approach to the storytelling side of the game?
So when I got back into the hobby, it was through Instagram. It was playing with my brothers, but finding the world that was out there was through Instagram. So I made an account and just started painting a few little things and sharing them, but really looking at what else was going on. And through that, I stumbled on the Inc. 28 scene. Yeah. And particularly, the Between the Boulder and Me guys and everyone who kind of moves in their orbit, and the amazing, huge narrative games that they were doing. And full credit to them. And everyone who works in that sphere is an amazing community of hobbyists who do fantastic work. And then, once a year they have this amazing, huge game. And I was looking at this and I was listening to podcasts about it and thinking, wouldn't this be amazing? But you hear them describe it and it's like, this is less a game, more collaborative tabletop performance art. And I looked at it, I was like, that'd be so cool to be involved in, but the logistics of it and the amazing skill level of these guys, it seems unattainable for someone like me. And I thought, well, why couldn't you do that on a small scale? Why can't you make these fun little narrative modes of gaming that anyone can do with their friends, with the people they game with, just on a weekly basis or whatever. And you can take a lot of the organizing work out of that by making a narrative game. And then there's a long history of narrative games, the whole 40, 50 years of RPGs now.
Yeah.
But then I was thinking, if you just, where I look at it, sorry, my cats are fighting under my feet. I was looking at it and thinking, what I'm into is pushing dudes around on a table and rolling dice and having a good time. I don't need full theatre of the mind. So do you even need a dungeon master? That can you construct a thing? And Rangers of Shadow Deep was a huge inspiration there as well, because it's the same model.
Yeah,
you can have this kind of fun narrative stuff of an unfolding story, particularly an unpredictable story, because random card draw and whatever, that gives you at least that enough of a veneer of narrative to get you involved in the story, without having to either have, a committed narrative-driven gaming group or a human on the other side of it running that story for you. And then in terms of the interstitial stuff, it was like, what can I do to tie this together without compromising or without undermining that lightness that I think is integral to the success of what it is. And it was, lean into what you've already got. You just need some simple little things that drive the narrative forwards. It's like, do I need to role play going into town and hassling a contact and succeeding or failing and solving a puzzle and whatever? And it's like, for some people that's the game. For some games, that's the game, and that's great. Yeah. But I was like, but this is not that game. This game is we're just fighting on a 2-foot by 3-foot board and having a good time. Yeah. But in between fights, maybe one of our henchmen went to town and made a mistake, and I drew the wrong card and he's injured, or the cultists are onto me and I'm at a disadvantage, or I got a bonus or whatever. And it's just that little bit of extra flavor to help link these scenarios together that, maybe an interlinked adventure. They may just be random pre-existing scenarios that you're piecing together to try and make a bit of a story. And so that's kind of the general philosophy of it, is just as lightly as possible add these little narrative twists and turns and hooks to give the flavor of narrative without needing a human driving the narrative.
For most of the miniature gamers here in Providence, the Inc. 28 point of view is alien to them. They may have played D&D, so have a vague sense of narrative minigames, but most of them are looking for an escape from work or life. They don't want or need to see the hobby as an opportunity for expression or art. But Acolyte seems like something that might bridge that gap.
In many ways, it's a game they already play, with models they already have, in a universe they already know. Yeah. And all you need to do is pick out your favorite guardsman or your favorite necromunda character or whatever, and they can be a little character and play these adventures. So that was one thing I really wanted to keep, is that very low barrier to entry. And if you've played enough Kill Team and bought a bunch of teams, you've got all the models you need.
While recent actions by Wizards of the Coast might make it appear otherwise, hacking games is baked into the tradition of RPGs, which is where I derive most of my tabletop experience. On the other hand, people entering the world of tabletop through Games Workshop have a real reluctance to hacking games.
And it's a function of the corporate attitude as well, I think, where there's an impetus from the inside to become all-encompassing, where with early RPGs and early wargaming, it was much more minimalist. Yeah. Partly through necessity. They couldn't produce these totalizing universes.
I often point out that RPGs and miniature games are folk traditions that have been subsumed by litigious corporations. Modes of play that were once shared across communities have experienced an enclosing of the commons.
with Games Workshop, that they've become more and more protective with their IP. And there's a wonderful irony there when you look to the 70s and the 80s at just how much these companies mined and ripped off the breadth of fantasy. That so much of Warhammer is Tolkien, is Moorcock, just these ideas, just and D&D as well. And then D&D gets its own influences, but they become ossified and protective, and you lose that DIY ethos from the commercial heart of it.
In the early days of Games Workshop, Citadel Miniatures was making miniatures for other settings, Star Trek and D&D and so on. The early versions of Games Workshop's games were designed to let you play across settings to sell the minis Citadel was making for these other universes that they did not create.
It goes to another level. You go back and you read Rogue Trader, the first 40k book, and the whole bestiary is D&D monsters with new names so people could use the models they already had.
Yeah, exactly.
What are these guys doing in space? Who cares? Just give them lasers and go for it.
So, what do you say to someone who's interested in hacking games, particularly GW's games?
There's two things, I think, and one probably speaks to my perspective on it, or where I'm coming from, is I'd call it modding as much as I'd call it hacking, because that's kind of where I was for the past 20-odd years, is playing PC games and tinkering with them, where maybe it's not the golden era of modding anymore, but for a long period there through the 90s and the 2000s, that's where some of the best games were coming from, was the community taking a functional engine and building a fantastic game on top of it, whether it's, a tight competitive thing like Counter-Strike built on Half-Life, or the much more narrative stuff built within those kind of games. And you can look at a tabletop rule set the same way as a game engine. In the same, and this is much more commonly understood in RPGs, where you'll have D&D 5th edition or whatever can power so many different universes and so many different games, right? And there's no reason that can't function as well on the tabletop, but the culture kind of isn't there, I think. It doesn't mean it can't be. And it has happened. You look at the Warlord games like Black Powder and Bolt Action and those kind of things. They kind of grew originally out of a lot of the GW ideas of War Master and so on that the ex-GW guys took over there. They take these ideas and they build different games on them. And so, commercially it happens. Andy Chambers talks about all game designers being magpies. You see a good idea, you steal it. And there's no reason everyone else can't do that. You take a good engine that you like. You take a game, you take mechanics that you enjoy and play whatever the hell you want on top of it. The other thing that I think is worth bearing in mind, if you're interested in game design and in writing games, there's a guy, I forget the name of the game, it might be Log, something like that. It's an RPG, and he talks about the problem of heartbreakers, right? Which is you pour your heart and soul into. You think you can make a better version of the game you already like. You can fix all its flaws, put out a new game, and everyone will love it, and you'll be the new Warhammer or the new Dungeons and Dragons, whatever. And you pour so much effort into this, and it just sinks like a stone. And they're called heartbreakers partly because they break the heart of the person who wrote it, but also the people who can see that, there's a great game here, but it's just not going to get the traction. But this writer, who I cannot remember his name, which is neglectful of me, but he says, like, if you want people to play your stuff, write content, not games, right? Because people have games they like, they have universes they like, and they want more cool stuff. And now that's not a that's not commercial advice, because I can't make a cent out of this, or Games Workshop will sue me out of existence. And, fair enough, it's their game, it's their universe. But I just wanted to make something cool, I wanted to make the game I wanted to play, but by slapping it on top of an existing game system, quite aside from me liking Kill Team and liking the universe, you already have the basis of a receptive audience. As I was saying earlier, I thought I should knuckle down and actually write this thing, because I've been telling people for 6 months how easy it would be to do it. Let's actually find out. And I had a bit of time on my hands because I was home with a new baby. And so while she was napping, I was punching out this game and playtesting and whatever. And I stuck it on Reddit for some feedback. I'm like, do people think this works? And within, a couple of weeks, I've got 1,000 downloads and hundreds of comments, and people saying, have you got a Discord? Can we join? Can we talk about this? Because you're sticking it into a community who already like 3/4 of what you're making, because they like the mechanics, because they like the universe. And if you're filling a gap, it may be a gap for a lot of other people too.
A lot of players have a game or setting they're holding on to that they're trying to get other people to invest in. But because of the enormous corporate entities that empower GW and Wizards' adversarial relationship to the rest of the community, it's really difficult to get other games to the table. It's a difficult social coordination problem. But I think your approach is clever, embedding your game into something that's already popular.
And it's not completely cynical. Yeah, I'm not saying what's the most popular game that I can use as bait to get people into this thing that I want to do. It's I found a game that I really liked, but it was missing something, and so I wrote what I thought was missing from the game, which was that narrative, cooperative element to it.
Is there some aspect of Acolyte that you feel is going unnoticed?
Yeah, like in a really nerdy game design sense, I really enjoyed the opportunity to take all the stuff I thought was broken in Kill Team and tweak it and shape it and balance it and cost it. Not because I'm like, plasma guns are for losers, no more of those. but more because I think there are a lot of missed opportunities in the base game for providing players with interesting choices to make. And that's something I've tried to maintain, through the design, is balance, not for competition, not for even chances of winning. And I really enjoyed your episode on balance, the ideas of the perception of balance and of probabilities of victory and so on. But with Acolyte, balance plays out differently. It's, on the one hand, you're never quite sure of probability until it happens, because random draw shapes scenarios, and it might be that you never actually get the card that you need until right at the end, and by that time you're swamped by monsters and whatever. Or it might be really easy, you might get it straight up. But within that variability of challenge, being able to say, well, here are 5 or 10 or 15 equally valid options, equally valid ways of approaching it. And so I've tried really hard to make that work and to get that balance right. And that's involved far too much time in spreadsheets, but also just getting a whole lot of feedback from the community, playtesters, people on the Discord who are like, I feel this is too strong, this is too weak, this doesn't work. Have you thought about this? And getting that feedback and using it to try and refine balance for player choice more than anything else, I've found super rewarding, and I think is something that's worked better in there than in the source material.
Acolyte is designed with campaign play in mind. The game does not resolve at the end of the session. Instead, it plays out over iterations of sessions, with each instance deriving from the previous adventures and in turn impacting the next.
The Kill Team mechanics, you've got a bunch of actions you can do each turn, and you can only do each one of them once. You can move, you can shoot, you can fight, you can press a button, you can do an extra little dash move, which is just half as much. And so you can only, you're selecting from a subset of things, but you can only do anything once. And sometimes you get skills that let you do things twice, and they're super powerful. And so in base kill team, like the most powerful thing in the game is when you can shoot twice, because it's such a combat-oriented shoot twice game. And I wanted that in because it's interesting, but it's so much better than everything else. And so I said, well, sure, here's a character class who can shoot twice, but only with the most garbage gun in the game.
Mm.
And so in Mission 1, they're great. They're the clear, obvious option. But the further you get in, the more and more they fall behind. It's like a reverse D&D wizard. And so you're committing to a garbage skill, well, not a garbage skill, a good skill, but with really diminishing returns. And then if you abandon that, you lose your base skill and you're behind everyone else even further. So when you have that stretch of time, you're able to have imbalance on a short-term basis, or grow into imbalance at the cost of struggling early on, that kind of thing. There's opportunities there over time that you don't get in a one-shot. Crusade works by taking the existing game and just adding stuff to it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Whereas what I've intentionally done with Acolyte is I've taken the existing mechanics and taken a lot of stuff out. So you start as a vanilla character and you can't do a lot of the stuff that a regular kill team can do. You can't do the fancy orders and the ploys and all the interesting things, and you have to earn that and grow that and develop that. And so you're attaining that level of complexity. You know, Kill Team is a strategically deeply complex game despite simple mechanics. But you attain that over time in the kind of RPG light of Acolyte as your guys grow and get smarter and more complex. And so I think that's another option for mitigating the problem of adding complexity to existing game is dumbing it down to start with.
While Acolyte provides the opportunity to run out-of-the-box kill team scenarios, the game creates new styles of play bespoke to the hack.
There's different opportunities that come in a solo or co-op game. So most of Kill Team is geared towards these symmetrical competitive scenarios where forces are equal, objectives are equal, the board may as well be a mirror. And the challenge is mostly reacting to another human. What I tried to do with the starter one is present different kinds of scenarios, and there's some cool lopsided asymmetrical narrative scenarios in the Kill Team books as well, but present challenges that don't exist in Kill Team and do exist in the broader world of gaming. So there's a scenario with a ticking clock, essentially, where you have to solve a problem before you get swamped by zombies. There's one that's a more old-fashioned dungeon crawl, and again, there's a time constraint there because things go wrong, and you've only got a set number of dudes to get through this dungeon, and then there's a big set piece battle at the end just to see how that would feel. So it's finding interesting scenarios, interesting different challenges, but then interlinking them in interesting different ways. So I'd like to do branching campaign options where depending on how you do or what you choose, it changes the way it plays out. And what fundamentally makes it different, I think, is not just that it's an asymmetrical scenario, but I think the game is best played cooperatively rather than solo, is that you're collaboratively trying to solve a problem.
Mm-hmm. And
so it's you look at the board state and it's like, well, I can move here and do this, or you can go there. I can support you to do this. How do we fit these jigsaw pieces together? We've got different skills in our guys. Who can do what? And it's that, it's that old school RPG dynamic of who kicks the door in first, who supports and how, what different strengths do different people bring to a collective problem. And so I think, just trying to pose different puzzles, but also springing different surprises on players, using that uncertainty and you can. One thing I'm tinkering with at the moment is not just changing the time of when things happen by card draw, but changing what happens fundamentally. Like, you can have a mission that can branch in completely different ways, and there becomes more gravity to the decision making when you know that there'll be that persistent impact.
In most tabletop games, your warband or army walks off into the sunset at the end of the game, and then a reset button's hit, and they show up to the next game as though nothing has happened.
I heard Joe McCulloch, who we were talking about earlier, say a fascinating thing about Stargrave, which was someone said to him, this is cool, but where's the morale system? And he's like, well, you don't need a morale system because it's a persistent game. You provide the morale as the player. If things are going badly, you don't want your little dudes to die, so you run away. And I found that really, really interesting, that you can just leave rules out if you construct the right incentives for the player. And narrative gaming, provided there's enough persistent impact of decisions, can provide the means to nudge or incentivize player behavior because of repercussions and consequences.
There is some chance that you're listening to this wondering why. Why narrative games? Why explore outside what Games Workshop has dictated?
Getting stuck into the narrative homebrew side of it, I think, is just great fun. It's messy, but it's fun and it's engaging and it's involving, and you find yourself just gluing weird shit together because it speaks to you rather than it's in the instructions. It doesn't have to serve any purpose on the table, but if you're happy messing with rules, you can make anything work.
Yeah.
So, at the moment I'm building these weird little pose-faced scavenger dudes because I thought, I wonder how that'll look.
Yeah.
And then, I'll find a use for them because I can. So, I don't know. I encourage everyone to just tinker and play and see what's out there. There's such a, even if 40K has its hooks in you, and it does in me, I still think about it after, 25 years out of the game. I'm still like, I wonder what's going on there. And occasionally I'm like, oh, they blew up fantasy. Well, that was weird. But, it's got its hooks in, and I'm kind of invested in a bit in not necessarily the characters and the universe, but the vibe of it.
Yeah.
But you don't have to be invested in the given rule set and the meta and the corporate architecture. You can explore those weird little corners of literature and ideas in whatever rule set, and there's so much cool stuff out there to tinker with. So I just encourage everyone to dig around and see what's going on. And if you find yourself interested in how it works, then to just start messing around with dice, roll some dice and see what they do.
Head swap.